So today is video number 3 in this series of videos talking about wedding photography. First one was the introduction. Second one was business, the sort of basics and getting started with business. There's going to be about 8 videos in this series. Today is photography, and we're going to look at gear, the basics, setting up, that kind of thing. In future videos we'll get into more detail, and we'll get into some more slightly more advanced sort of techniques and things. We'll look at editing, delivering photos to your clients and all that kind of thing. Right, so today, now we've already covered in the introduction, and if you haven't seen that, hit subscribe, go back through the videos, notified of the new videos as well. So I talked about gear very quickly in the introduction. Let's talk a little bit more about getting started in wedding photography. In fact, not even getting started, the early days, and I'm talking the first couple of years maybe. Point number 1, and I've already said this in the introduction, please, if you're going to photograph someone's wedding, respect the fact that this is a super important one day in their life, and that it's worthy of great photographs. If you bought a camera last week and you think you can go out next week and photograph a wedding, please, I see people actually on Facebook kind of asking questions, literally like they've just bought a camera and I want to photograph a wedding. Now, it might be a friend's wedding. I wouldn't even do a friend's wedding for nothing. It's too important. So the sort of level that you need to be is where you know about the exposure triangle, you know what effect different apertures are going to have on the look, you know what effect different lens, what different focal lengths will have on the compression, what you can get in the frame. You know how to mix those two together. You know what those things will do to the speed. You know the slowest shutter speed you can use for certain types of photograph. And I'm sorry if the light's going up and down. I've got my camera on fixed exposure and the sun's going in and out. I'm sorry. So that's just one sort of problem that you're going to get at a wedding. You've got to know all that stuff. You've got to know how to change the type of focus, the focus area. Where do you go in the menu to change your auto ISO and all that kind of stuff. So knowing your gear, your particular gear, it doesn't have to be every camera on the market, but whatever camera it is that you're holding in your hand, you have to know how to use that thing instinctively pretty well, because come the day of the wedding, there's so much to think about. You don't need to be thinking about it. You can't afford to be thinking about this. And I honestly, I couldn't see how anyone could get to the sort of level of proficiency you need to without having a camera for at least a year. Probably more like 2 years, unless you're able to get out almost every day and practice with your camera. So that's where you need to be, please. Gear, again, mentioned it briefly in the introduction. You need, and you really should have, 2 cameras. You don't need 4 or 5 like I've got, but you do need 2. One of those at least must really have 2 card slots. Touch wood, throw salt over my shoulder and all sorts of things. I've never had a card go wrong, but I see people online that have had a card go wrong. They've lost their photos. It is a complete disaster of unimaginable proportions to do that. So you need 2 card slots in whichever is your main camera. We'll talk about that in a second. If you really cannot get a camera with 2 card slots, and you've got 2 cameras with 1 card slot each, whichever is going to be your main camera, I would suggest getting small memory cards, 16, maybe even 8 gigabytes, depending how many photos your camera will write to the card. But make it so that that card will only hold maybe 80, 100 photos, and then change the card so that if one of the cards fails, you've got all the rest. You've only lost one card, you've only lost 100, 150 photos, something like that. It's not quite such a disaster. And also mix the cameras up if you've only got one card slot. So, as to whether they're DSLRs or, and it's getting really dark, I'm sorry, just bear with me, I'm sorry about the light. Yeah, see, so as to whether they're DSLRs or mirrorless, really doesn't matter too much. I still use both. I've got my D780 DSLR, I've got two Sonys which are mirrorless, I've got my Leica which is, well, that's mirrorless I suppose, but it's so old with its rangefinder thing, it's kind of in a category of its own. So it really doesn't matter, as long as you know your camera. Lenses are the most important aspect when it comes to image quality. So your camera is the equipment that captures the photo. It's the thing that has to be usable and that you have to understand. The lens is the thing that gives you the picture quality. And if you're just beginning, and again I'm talking maybe 1, 2, for myself I'm talking 3 or 4 years, when I started, I just had a 50mm lens, 50mm prime lens, 1.8 probably, and a 24-70 2.8 zoom lens. To make your life easy on a wedding day, I would suggest using the 24-70 most of the time. It means you've got no thoughts about, have I got the right lens on the camera, do I need to get in my bag and change the lens for this shot. You can just zoom and you can get the shot. It does make life a lot easier. It won't give you quite as good an image quality as if you had a prime lens on, unless you spent a heck of a lot of money on a zoom lens. If you spent $2,500 or something like that, then you've probably got a very good zoom lens, and it's probably going to give you images which are pretty close to being as good as a prime lens. But a zoom will make your life easier. I would suggest 50mm 1.8 prime lens on the other camera for those more shallow depth of field types of shots, which we'll talk about in future videos, when you want to use those, when that look is the kind of look that works for this particular scene. We'll talk about that, as I say, in future. So just 2 lenses is really all you need, one on each camera. And as I say, if you've got one camera with 2 card slots, put the zoom on that, because that's going to be the one you're going to make your main camera and use most throughout the day. Other gear you need, you really should have a flash. I've got one flash for the camera, and I've got a dedicated off-camera flash, a Godox AD200 for off-camera flash. Personally, now I very, very rarely use on-camera flash. It just gives that look like you've got a flash on the camera, and I don't like that look anymore. Again, we'll talk about that in future videos. But equipment wise, you need one, even if you use it off camera. And there are times when having it on camera is going to make your life a lot easier. That's really all you need. You don't need a big off camera flash or anything like that. You do need to use that flash off camera, you're going to need a flash trigger. Again, I've got Godox, so you can use it as an off-camera flash, which we will deal with how you do all that in a future video. So you've got 2 cameras, 2 lenses, 1 flash, 1 trigger, lots of memory cards. You're about there. You can photograph a wedding. And what we'll now talk about briefly is the actual way I set my cameras up that I find works best at weddings. Modern cameras, especially something like these Sonys, I've just got so many programmable buttons, so many different features. They are incredibly complicated to set up. But your aim when you're setting these things up is to make them absolutely stupidly easy to use come the wedding day. so that all you have to do basically is turn the thing on, point it, and press the shutter, and that is all you need to think about. So, exposure. Always, apart from when you're using flash, other than that, always aperture priority. I can't think of any situation where I wouldn't use aperture priority without a flash. So set your maximum ISO, set your minimum shutter speed, let the camera do the rest. Maximum ISO will depend on your camera. My D780, I can set that to 25,600 and know that I'm still going to get usable photos. The Sonys, I stick to 12,800. They're not quite as good as the D780, so I just set them one stop lower. Minimum shutter speed, I set by default at 2/50th of a second. Regardless of what lens I've got on there, that plays no part in my thought process at all. It's to do with people, and people move. If people move at this sort of speed, and you're trying to photograph them, if you're shooting much less than, well, 2/50th gets you really in a safe zone. You're going to get a sharp picture. You can come down to 125, but if they're moving like that, you're probably okay. If they do that, you're probably not okay. So you're getting into the area where you are going to get a few shots where they're going to be blurry because they moved. Not you moved, not lens, not camera shake, but they moved. It happens. And once you get below 1/25th, you've really only can use that if you've got them posed, they're stationary, they're not moving, and they're hardly breathing. So 1/25th, if the light, if I came indoors towards the later in the day and it's getting dark inside, then I may change my auto ISO from 2/50th minimum speed down to 1/25th, but certainly never any slower than that. In fact, on the I think I'm right. In fact, on the Nikon, I can choose more speeds. I can choose, I think, 1/80th, 1/50th, 1/25th. So I will probably choose 1/50th. On the Sonys, I think I'm right in saying, I can only go 2/50th or 1/25th. So that's the exposure taken care of. Oh, metering. Again, to make my life easy and to make your life easy, I use matrix metering. It's not as accurate as spot metering, but chances are it's not going to be a million miles off. These days with digital cameras, you can adjust the exposure in Lightroom afterwards, and it gives you something less to think about. Certainly if you're using a DSLR where you're not seeing the actual exposure, I would always go for matrix metering, definitely, to be safe. Otherwise you've got to take a test shot, check it, and if you recompose slightly with spot metering, it's going to change anyway. So it's really difficult using spot metering and getting really accurate exposure on a DSLR. On mirrorless, of course, you get to see what you're actually photographing. You can see the exposure. You can use spot metering, but the problem that I find is that you've only got to move the camera a tiny bit in some situations, and your exposure is going to go up or down a heck of a lot. Having that sort of average in between just means you can, again, concentrate more on what's happening in front of the camera rather than the camera itself. So matrix metering for almost every occasion, other than flash, which we'll do with in a future video. Now, there may be times during the wedding day when aperture priority is simply not going to cut it. For instance, on a very dark, dull, overcast day, maybe even indoors, confetti shot or something like that, where or throwing a bouquet, or you want a really fast shutter speed. Your camera is defaulting down to 2/50th of a second, and that's just not fast enough. So in that case, yes, I would switch to manual. On the Sony, it's just a click of the dial. Same on the Nikon. Just switch it round, and then I would choose the shutter speed I want, maybe a 500th, thousandth of a second. But I've still got the cameras set up so that on manual exposure, the ISO is still auto ISO. But I've now set the, I've now made the camera ignore the minimum shutter speed. I've set the shutter speed that I want, but I've still got the camera taking care of the exposure. Still makes life easy. It's simply doing, if I press the button, that I'm now in manual mode. I can set the speed and I can take the shot. It's literally a few seconds to change that, and then you're ready to concentrate on actually getting the photograph. Okay, I think that covers exposure. Focusing. I could spend an hour or two talking about focusing. There's such a huge wide range of focusing that different cameras, different manufacturers use. I can't really tell you exactly what to do. All I can tell you is what I'm using on these, and hopefully that will be some help. So the D780, which I still use at weddings, if it's getting dark, and certainly in the evening, indoors, I will probably take this out and put one of the Sonys away, because as I say, the low light performance of this is absolutely amazing. And on this I have it set up so that I have two, with just a press of a button and spin of the wheel. I can either use single point autofocus, and I can move the point around if I want to around the screen, or click one anti-clockwise, I think it is, it will go to auto. Auto, you say? Yes. I actually use auto on the D780 because it's got a really good face detection algorithm built in. Even through the viewfinder I'm not talking about live view. I can point this through a viewfinder at someone. If there's a bunch of people there, it will focus. It's got all the little points light up, and it will light up over the nearest face to me, and it is really super accurate. If I've got one face and I'm really close up with a 85 lens on or something, it will actually focus around their eye. It is brilliant. It really is for DSLR. Yours might not be as good as that, in which case single point is going to work all the time in AFC continuous focus, back button focus, job done. Mirrorless. With all their huge array of different ways of setting up face detect, eye autofocus, and how sensitive it all is, and what if someone walks in front, and it can take an awful lot of setting up. Once we've got there, it's probably going to be quite good. These, I use two buttons because your camera might be similar. I'm not sure about Canons. I've never used a Canon. But if you've got a mirrorless Nikon, which I've had before the Sonys, certainly on the Z8, you can set things up very similar to this. So the back button focus is set to eye autofocus, and I've got a small flexible tracking spot, so in kind of the centre of the screen. So I simply put that over someone's face, hit the back button focus, it'll pick up their eye, and then I can move the camera around all over the place, and it will track their eye. It will just stay focused on that. I can move backwards, forwards, they can move. It just stays in focus. Unbelievable. And then I hit the shutter when I want the shot. Dead simple. And it works. It works. A little bit of a promotion here for Sony. It works easily as well as the Nikon Z8 or the Z9. It is stunning. However, there are times when I don't want to focus on someone's face or their eye. Maybe, situation the other week, I had the groom kind of side on to me and I could just see his eye. and she had her hands, the bride had her hands up around his neck, and I wanted a photograph of the ring. And if I used the back button focus, which used face and eye detect, it either picked up her face and her eye, or the corner of his face, there's no way I could focus on the rings. So that's rubbish. That's just not very helpful at all. So I've got the actual half press of the shutter. If you're not pressing the back button focus to use eye autofocus, half press of the shutter now just engages non-face and eye autofocus small tracking spot, tracking square. So I would simply put that again in the centre-ish of the screen, put that over the ring, now just half press the shutter, ignores their faces, focuses on whatever is under that little box, move it around, keep the shutter half pressed, stays locked onto that until I've got the composition I want, click, I've done. Extremely simple. Maybe not so simple to set up, but once you've set it up, it works brilliantly, and that's the same for both cameras. So that's focusing. However, people do tend to focus too much on focusing. I see so many people commented about poor focus on this and how do I set this up, and it is important, but not as important as you might think if you don't shoot at 1.4 all the time. If you shoot more realistically at say f4, f5.6, then your depth of field is going to be a heck of a lot bigger than at 1.4. Focus isn't such a critical issue, and certainly for anything where focus is going to be a problem could be a problem for the camera, like confetti, bouquet throw, anything like that, I would go for probably 5.6 because it allows the camera to have a little bit more of an inaccuracy and you still get good photos. And whilst there is a place for 1.4 wide open, it's not all the time. As for the other things, white balance, auto, anything I've forgotten is auto. All in an effort to make life simple at the wedding. Which allows us to get to the day of the wedding. That we're going to cover in the next video on photography. The video I'm going to do next is going to be business 2, when we'll look at some realistic ways of getting business. In business 1 we talked about what the market was, about all the numbers, what the opportunity was. Next business 1 we'll look at how to get some of that business. Hope you found that useful. I'll be back soon. Thanks for watching.